Welcome to my 4-part series on how to do drag makeup. I'll be showing each step and the products used on screen at all times during the videos. And be sure to watch all 4 videos to see the full transformation. Hi, my name is Magenta with a J, and I am going to do a tutorial today for getting you into drag, perhaps for the first time. I am doing this because when I started drag, I found it really difficult to find tutorials and other information online that gave really clear, easy to understand instructions for products and steps and the reasons behind why you're doing things for somebody that had never done this before. So I'm going to go step by step and try to explain everything in a way that you can understand even if you have never used makeup before or have very little idea about what you need to do to create a drag face. So let's get started. So the first phase of a drag mug is basically just prepping your face. So you want to make sure that first of all that you've washed your face and shaved, but then the first thing that you need to do after that is block your brows. And this is something that even if you do looks eventually that don't involve that, you really should know how to block your brows because it's kind of the gateway to transforming your face. For me, when I learned to block my brows, I realized that was really the biggest thing that made my face shape look different. So this is a really important skill. So I start with some 70% alcohol, and I take one of these little cotton rounds, and what I'm going to do is just wipe off my brows so that any oil or other excess dirt or anything is out of there, and it's easier to apply the glue and have it stick. Now for this, I'm also going to actually do the same technique to cover my sideburns so that you don't see any of the hair coming out from under the wig when I'm done. However, if you're just starting out in drag, I don't think you need to do this necessarily, but it follows the same concept and steps as covering your brows. I also like to have a towel handy. This is a towel that was kind of old and ripped up a bit, so it's fine if I get some makeup on it. But I can use this to just make sure any wetness from the alcohol dries off faster. And I also use this towel when we get into the next step to clean off some of the glue. And yes, that is glue that we will be using to block our brows. So this is a little Elmer's purple disappearing glue stick. There are other techniques for covering your brows. I've tried Prozaid. That's another one that's pretty popular. However, I found that it is very hard to get off, and it's also more expensive. So this is, I think, ended up being like 25 cents each when you get a big pack of them. So I highly recommend learning the glue stick method. And I also recommend going with the smaller glue sticks. That way you don't have as much excess from a larger glue stick, and you're also a little more precise. So when we do this, we're going to do 3 layers, but the first layer of glue is intended to just get as much glue on there as possible. And then after that, we'll start working at flattening it and giving us a clean surface on which to apply new brows and makeup. So I'm just going to go in back and forth against the grain, just trying to get as much of this glue into the hairs as possible. So now that we've got glue in there, I'm going to take my eyebrow brush and I'm going to use the brushy end. As you can tell, this is a little bit used, but I'm okay with that. It actually makes the brush a bit stiffer. And I'm just going to brush upwards so that the hairs in my brows are going up, kind of fanning out a little bit and flattening against my forehead. So once I've done that, I'm actually going to use this technique where I use the sort of sharper side of the eyebrow brush and actually stab at the glue stick a little so it's a little more uneven on the surface. That way more comes off. And I'm going to use that to just go over where I just brushed, and this time I'm going to go in the same direction as the hairs I brushed. All right, now I've got that first layer of glue on, smoothed over a little bit with additional glue. At this stage, I'm going to take my trusty towel, I'm going to get it a little bit wet, and then we're just going to use that to rub off any excess. Now at this stage, you just need to let it dry, and then we're going to do 2 more layers. Since, however, I want to cover my sideburns, I'm actually going to do that along with the eyebrows step by step. Alright, now that this first layer is fairly dry, it doesn't have to be fully dry, I am going to start the second layer of glue. And I do the same thing again where I poke the top, and this time I have to make sure that I'm absolutely not disrupting any of what I've glued down before by still moving in the same direction as the hairs. You can also, saw this from Trixie Mattel, lick the tip of the glue stick to get it to stick a little bit better. Because this is water soluble and you want it to kind of affix. So as long as that doesn't gross you out. So this time, now that I have applied the second layer of glue, I want to make sure that it's fairly smoothed out before using the towel to dry off any excess. So for this, I really think it's best just to use your finger. So I lick my finger to get it a little bit wet. And then I am just going over the edges of the glue. I'm trying to make it so that it sort of smoothly fades in the edges so that there's not like a big ridge of glue. While this is still drying, you can actually get started on the next step, which is to do some color correction around your beard area. Now you don't have to do color correction, particularly if you have very little stubble or facial hair. However, just keep in mind if you're wearing makeup for a long time, it's constantly growing, so it may not be visible at first, but if you don't have some level of color correction there to hide the beard, it may start to appear over time. So what I do is cover basically my chin, mustache, lower beard area, and because I did my sideburns, I will also cover that. So this part tends to dry a bit faster than the brows. So I'm actually going to do my third layer of glue on the sideburns first. And again, you don't have to do that part if you don't want to. So for the sideburns, we're going to end up doing the same thing for our eyebrows, but we're going to now set the glue using some neutral setting powder. This is a big tub of Ben Nye colorless powder. It's important to get something that has no pigment to it at all. Because a lot of powders are called translucent but actually have some pigment to them. But this is a really good all-purpose neutral setting powder. It'll be your best friend doing drag. So using a puff like this, I put some in a little container here of the setting powder, and I'm just going to press it into the sideburns where I had the glue. And I'm being careful here not to like rub around. I'm really just patting and pressing gently. So next I take this big makeup brush and I'm just gonna dust off where I just applied that setting powder. So anything that didn't stick to the area will be wiped off with this. Now to do the color correction, I am going to do probably a more complicated process than you need to. There are color correction creams that you can use that I should probably get, but I'll walk you through the way that I do it because it means you don't have to get a specific separate cream for this. But I always start with primer, so I use an e.l.f. hydrating face primer. I don't know that the brand matters that much. But the main thing that this does is make it much easier for you to apply makeup on your skin. It just makes it way more challenging to apply the makeup when you don't have the primer base. So I applied it on my beard area, and then for the sides where I just applied that powder, I'm actually going to go over it. So I'm sort of spreading it out on my fingers a little bit so it's not too concentrated. And rather than rubbing too much and just kind of tapping it in, basically between the glue and the powder and the primer, this is mostly making this area flatter so that you don't see as much hair texture once all the makeup is on. So I've applied the primer. Now what I'm going to do is apply some foundation over those areas where I just applied primer. I use a Krylon TV paint stick. You could also use Mehron or Dermablend. They both have good foundation sticks. The key is you have to be using something that's full coverage. If you try to use something that's just like a CoverGirl or Maybelline from the drugstore, you're not going to get the level of coverage that you need. It really needs to cover your face like a layer as opposed to just adding a tint. So because your hair will end up having a bit of a bluish purplish tone to it from your stubble and your sideburns, certain hair colors such as blonde, it might not be as noticeable. The way that color correction works is you actually apply the opposite color on the color wheel, and it's intended to neutralize that a bit. So when you apply this, it'll look reddish orangish, but once you have the full layer of foundation on over it, you won't see that layer anymore. After I've applied this foundation here is take a little disposable makeup, eye makeup applicator, and then I have my CC Beauty face paint kit. You can get similar things from other brands. I actually think that this is the most useful product that I have in my whole arsenal in terms of allowing me to do exciting, interesting things with my looks. So get this. So first I'm taking a little bit of the yellow. If they had just like an orange red color in here already, I would just use that, but instead I'm gonna kind of mix it on my face. So I'm just dabbing the yellow, going back for seconds here. The most hair I have is on my chin, so that's where I tend to concentrate it a bit. And applying a healthy amount on the sideburns. Now I'm going to use the other end of this makeup applicator with some red paint and just kind of dab that over where I put the yellow. And precision is not very important right now because you will be blending all of this. Once I've got kind of a healthy amount of color there, I take a little makeup wedge. And you could probably use a beauty blender for this as well. I don't know why I've gotten into the habit of these little sponges, but you just need to start tapping out. And it's key that you are dabbing, you're not wiping. You're trying to get this to stay on your skin, not wipe it off, but also blend it in at the same time. When I've got that pretty well blended, I actually take the other end and just make sure that the outer edges are sort of blended in so that there's not a harsh line here that might show through the makeup later. So you end up with a little bit of reddish orange over the areas that hair would grow on your face. If you have a really thick 5 o'clock shadow that comes through, you may want to do a thicker, darker, or more intensely colored layer. Fortunately, I really don't have that, so this is good enough for my purposes. And again, you can skip this entirely, particularly if you're new to drag makeup. Just note that there's a good chance that it might start to look like you have a bit of a beard under your makeup if you skip this step. So the last piece to do there after you apply all that is go back to your setting powder. Again, this is neutral. And just apply it over everything that you just put on your face. And similar to before, you're going to dust off the excess by just going over everything. So since you did this while the second layer of glue was still drying up here, it's now dry so that you can go back to your eyebrows and add that third layer of glue to make sure that you are really giving them full coverage. And at this point, since they should be pretty well glued down, you can start to do more of the side to side when you apply the glue so that you're filling in any of the remaining ridges in the hair. So before we get to the very final step of covering the brows, we do want to let this dry just a little bit, not fully because we still want it somewhat tacky when we apply the setting powder. But since I just used a little bit of water in addition to the glue, it might get a little messy if I don't let it dry for at least a couple minutes. But one thing I want to note is you will notice afterwards that you will still be able to see your brows, and it's important to remember that you're going to be applying additional layers of makeup over that. So for me, the brows end up disappearing once the foundation and eye makeup and all that is applied. However, if you have really thick brows, really dark brows, you might want to do the same technique that I used on my beard and sideburn area to add a little bit of color correction over the brow before you add more makeup. However, I find that I don't need that, so I skip that step. All right, so it's been a couple minutes. I think that this is still a little bit tacky, but dry enough that it's not going to make a big mess. So I'm going back to my setting powder and very gently applying it and pushing in firmly. So what I'm trying to do is get the powder in there and simultaneously force the flattening. So you should be able to see that they're pretty flat. You don't see a lot of individual hairs. I'm going to do the same thing as I did elsewhere with the setting powder and just dust off the excess here. One thing to note, I do 3 layers and then apply powder. Other people might do more layers if they feel they need more to really hide their brows. Or if you have really light brows, you might not need 3, you could do 2 or maybe even 1. And then if you're a real committed drag queen, you could shave your brows off, but that is not something that I personally want to do for the rest of my days. All right, so at this stage, we have our face prepped to actually begin applying real makeup. So as you can tell, this is a long process, and you have a lot of prep work before you really get into the exciting, fun, colorful stuff. Thanks for watching the first video in my 4-part series. Be sure to follow me on Instagram and make sure to watch the next video, Step 2, Foundation and Contour.